Welcome to part 2 of tips to creating an effective narrative. Let's jump straight into it. But before we do, just remember, a narrative is a form of entertainment. It should be engaging for the reader, and therefore what we're aiming for is that our writing is memorable, that it's engaging, and that we have an emotional connection. Now, our tip for this video is that you need to use a balance of communication styles. A model that I developed is one to think of the 3 elements of storytelling, which are dialogue, external description, and internal description. And we're going to break down each of these 3 things separately so you can see what they achieve in the story. But obviously your goal is to hit that middle point so that you're getting a balance of these 3 methods of communication. So let's break it up a little bit. When we look at external description, we're really talking about description of external or outside features. They're usually related to what a character looks like, or the environment, the colour of the walls, the colour of the carpet. They also relate to the senses, the things that we see, hear, touch, smell, and taste. If you were thinking of the feel of the cold tiles on someone's bare feet, that's external description. If you were thinking of the smell of food in the hallway of someone's house, that's external description. But similarly, if you were talking about what someone was wearing, or what something looked like, or even what someone was doing, an action like they picked up the vase, it would still be external description. Really what this is about is allowing the reader to picture the world of the narrative. You need your audience to be able to imagine these things actually happening. It allows the reader to create imagery in their head about the story. If everything's happening inside a character's head and we have no idea about what's happening or what anyone looks like, we disengage really quickly. So external description is incredibly important. Let's look at a few examples. The room was crowded and dim. The walls seemed to lean inwards with the rotting wallpaper peeling at the seams. A faint smell of mould coursed through the air. His face seemed familiar, as though it belonged to a family member from the past. The lines of his brow were expressive, and he held himself with surprising confidence considering his frail physique. The cold air left goosebumps on her skin as she tried to make sense of the picture before her. The rafters above groaned and creaked with the pressure of the outside storm. Notice in each of these examples, we've included not just what was seen, whether the room being crowded and dim, but also what the smell was, or what people were hearing, or how people appeared. This is really important when it comes to creating imagery, but it's not the only way to tell a story. Let's look at the second factor. Internal description. Now you might have guessed, but in this case we're talking about what's happening inside somebody. So usually it's related to a particular character. We're talking about feelings and emotions and the motivations of a character. Yes, the character might have picked up the trash can and thrown it at someone else, but what we're really interested in is why did they do that? What were they thinking? What motivated their action? What was going on inside their head? It gives insight into a character's inner voice, and it justifies actions and behaviour of characters beyond which could be perceived on the surface. Bit of a stumble there. It allows the reader to connect with the character in a deeper and a more intimate manner. We need to really know what's happening inside and out with our characters. It's not enough just to say this person got up and ran away. We want to connect and we want to know what's happening on the inside. So really make sure that when it comes to describing any kind of scene, you're bringing in external and internal description. Some examples. She felt the anger build up inside her as the heat rushed to her head and the pressure began to push behind her eyes. He felt butterflies in his stomach, and the anxiety within him seemed desperate to wriggle itself out through his limbs. He felt lightheaded and nauseous. I couldn't believe what had just happened. My heart stopped with the shock, and I felt my body become slow and cumbersome, as though I had suddenly forgotten how to move. Now notice in each of these description examples, we're not being obvious in the way we say it. We're actually often talking using metaphors and imagery. Butterflies in the stomach, feeling heat rush behind someone's head. These are ways that we can describe how something feels, but they're also things that can't be physically seen. Again, a really important part of storytelling. The third element we're looking at is dialogue. And I can tell you, when I first started out writing, I used to hate writing dialogue because I used to love my descriptive writing, which would go on forever and ever. But I came to realise that dialogue is a really important part of storytelling. And the reason behind that is because it really shows how the characters present themselves to the world. Sometimes in someone's head, they might be thinking one thing, but when it comes to actually communicating, it's completely different. Someone can be really confident and really funny and really witty inside their head, but the way they interact with somebody else can be completely different. When I think about dialogue, I actually recognise that the only way that we know people in our lives is through talking to them. So if you're leaving out dialogue in your story, we're missing a crucial part of storytelling that relates to who your character is and how they relate to other people. It gives vital information about how your character connects with others and allows the reader to form a relationship and identify with the character in a way that they would not through internal description. We need to be able to picture ourselves talking with the character, and we can't do that if we can't imagine their voice. This being said, when it comes to dialogue, it needs to be set out properly with punctuation and formatting, and there's some really specific rules to this, so make sure you double check before you come to include this content. A couple of examples. "You are so annoying." Emily felt the bile in her throat start to build at the sight of her brother. "What? It's nothing." James continued what he was doing. "It's not nothing. There's something here. Something. What is it?" I don't know. It just feels wrong." Now, you notice in these examples that the dialogue isn't necessarily clear. Like what they're talking about. "Oh, hey, look over there. The walls are red." It's not obvious, but you really need to think when it comes to dialogue about the fact that when people talk, they rarely articulate exactly what they mean. And it's often through saying things like, "Oh, that thing over there," or "I feel really something at the moment," is actually a relatable way to communicate how someone would actually talk. I can guarantee, I doubt that I've been in any situations where someone has really perfectly summed up exactly how they feel. So think about dialogue and think about how you would express yourself if you felt a particular emotion. At the end of the day, it's not about doing just one of these things though. You always need to use a mix of these three elements of communication and never allow yourself to fall into one type for too long. Here's an example. He looked at his red sneakers and studied the wear and tear that was evident on the soles. The ground was rough, and the traction of the road was wearing them down. He moved out of the sun to give his skin some relief. There were trees in the distance, but for now, the ruins of what must have once been a fuel station would have to do. He sat down and pulled some supplies from his bag. There were a few ration bars and half a pot of water. He pulled back the colourful wrapping of the ration bar and took a bite. Now, this all reads really clearly, but if I was going to give it some feedback, I'd say that we get a great sense of what this person is doing and seeing, but do we really get a sense of who this person is and what's motivating them? Sure, that might have come later on in the piece of writing or in the story, but why can't it come right now? Why can't we just say what this person is thinking? Why can't we be more clever in our storytelling? Otherwise, it all seems very one-dimensional. There's no depth to this character. There's no discussion of the emotion or the feeling that this character's going through. Are they happy? Are they tired? Are they nervous? At the moment, all we know is that they're sitting in an abandoned fuel station, but it's limited information. There's a lot of text here without a clear break, and we need some greater pace and variety to the writing. It feels like describing this abandoned fuel station could go on forever without ever getting to the point. We need a break in the cycle. We need to get moving. And you need to think about this in your writing. When you're writing externally, once you get up to 3 or 4 sentences, challenge yourself to change things up. You need to keep the pace and the movement of your language going, particularly in a short story. Don't allow yourself to get stuck writing 500 words about the colour of the walls. Let's try a variation of trying to explain that same information with a balanced technique. He looked at his red sneakers and studied the wear and tear that was evident on the soles. How long can I keep this up? He imagined himself a week, 2 weeks, or even 6 months from where he was, and the thought of starving in the middle of this wasteland with no supplies sent shivers up his spine. Just get through today. He pulled his backpack open and studied the contents. Oh, what a surprise. Rations again. He couldn't help but smile at what his mother would have said to eating candy bars for dinner. Now, notice in this case, we've tried to give the same type of information. We haven't talked about the fuel station, I know, but we have given a lot more information about what he's thinking and feeling. We've put in a lot more depth to this. We've shown that obviously he's tired, he's afraid, and he's been eating rations for the last, who knows how long. We can see as well as that his background, his family, the things that go through his mind. It's not just one-dimensional. So I encourage you to really think about how you can bring different balanced elements of communication into your writing. And what you'll find is that if you're jumping from one to the other, rather than committing entire blocks of text to just the external, internal, or dialogue, your writing will be much snappier and much more effective. Hopefully this is something that comes in handy.